with her for most of my life. She was my rock until she got sick. It was difficult seeing her go through the diagnosis, and eventually she died. I knew that she had wanted to reconnect with my dad before then, and she never got the chance to. It showed me life is too short to hold those kinds of grudges.
Objection to speculation, Your Honor. The witness has testified that his mom wanted to reconnect with Avery Bancroft before she passed.
Maybe. Your Honor, this witness already testified that he had a really close relationship with his mother. Given the fact that he was close with his mother and that they had a somewhat estranged relationship with their father, it's fair for him to testify as to what she was interested in because they had that kind of relationship. And if I may proffer, Mr. Hobson's going to explain how after his mother died, he eventually did try to reconnect and make things right with his father.
If this was his understanding, I'll allow it, but be careful because you are crossing into territory where he's testifying about what somebody else thinks and feels.
Yes, Your Honor, and we'd be amenable to a limiting instruction to the jury that that's just what Mr. Hobson's understanding is.
The objection is overruled, but I encourage you to bring it again if you think this issue is pressing out.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Hobson, I want to go ahead and shift focus to your father in that case. What was that relationship like?
Not great. We didn't talk for most of my childhood. Once we did start to have a relationship, we would be at odds a lot about my work. He treated me like he saw my volunteer work as a waste of time compared to his corporate empire. It was difficult, but he did support me in his own ways.
How did your dad support you?
Well, he gave me a stipend of $50,000 a month that I could use to pay off the loans I'd gotten after my mom died and for my education. Then I could start to use that money towards the causes that I really believed in. One day, the money just stopped coming in, and I wasn't worried about the money. It just felt like his support had ended.
Well, did you ever figure out why the support ended?
No, I didn't. I wasn't sure why he would stop paying for the cause I believed in. I wasn't sure.
Well, did you ever have a chance to work on your relationship with your father?
I thought that I finally might in April. I was traveling all around with my girlfriend, Kelly Dews. We'd just gotten back from Argentina, and now we wanted to go to Australia. Kelly Dews wanted to book a ticket on the Mid-Riverina Express. When I learned that my dad would be on that train, I thought I would try to avoid him at first.
Well, did you end up avoiding him?
No. Once I went to book those tickets, I realized that the only time slot available was the same as my dad had. I figured this was my sign that we'd be able to put the past behind us, so I booked the train.
Well, while you were on that train, did you ever have the opportunity to put the past behind you?
Well, we did get to talk, but not exactly. Our last conversation was difficult for the both of us.
What do you mean?
Well, all my dad wanted to talk about was work, as usual. He told me that I wasn't respecting the Bancroft legacy. And I told him I didn't care about a legacy that was putting more holes in the ozone every day. And then I turned to storm off, and before I could, he tore this medallion off of his neck and threw it at me.
Mr. Hobson, what medallion are you talking about?
Well, once I looked at it, I realized this was the medallion that my mom had given him on their first date. I had no idea he had kept it after all of these years, and maybe if I'd known, maybe we could have understood each other.
Thank you. I want to go ahead and shift focus now to when you first arrived on the train. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Well, first, the train was beautiful. There was a welcome dinner for the platinum section that I went to, but once I got there, all I could feel was this overwhelming stress.
Mr. Hobson, why were you stressed?
Besides, for reconciling with my father, I noticed someone from across the train. It was Hillary Edmond, and I kept looking around to see if she would recognize me or my dad.
Well, hold on, Mr. Hobson. Who's Hillary Edmond?
Dr. Edmond. I know her from back when her spouse was running for a political campaign. My dad got involved, and it got messy.
Well, how did it get messy?
My dad launched a bunch of political campaigns against Dr. Edmund's spouse, and eventually her spouse had to drop out of the public eye completely.
Was the doctor impacted at all by this campaign?
Yes, that's what made it so difficult seeing her there. Once the doctor's spouse dropped out of the public eye, my dad turned these campaigns onto Dr. Edmund's practice, and it closed soon after.
Mr. Hobson, while you were on that train, did you have any conversations with Hillary Edmund?
We had a few interactions, but we had one longer conversation on April 24th.
Let's talk about it. What did the doctor say to you?
Well, the doctor approached me and told me they were sorry about my father's health.
And did you know what she was talking about?
At first, I was confused. I had to clarify if she was talking about my dad's chronic kidney disease, or CKD, and she said that she was. I wasn't expecting to hear about it, and honestly, my dad's the picture of health to me.
Well, can you tell us about that chronic kidney disease?
Yeah, it's a complex diagnosis. I didn't, and I still don't fully understand what it means, but I went with my dad when he got diagnosed for it. It was a vulnerable moment between the both of us. The doctors went through the diagnosis very carefully with us.
Did you learn anything from that diagnosis?
I learned that even the smallest bit of potassium that my dad ingested could be enough to send him into a stroke that could lead to death.
Mr. Hobson, did you ever find out if there was something that could prevent that shock from happening?
Well, it wasn't a disappointment, but my half-sibling, Shannon, went with further medical appointments for my dad, and Shannon called me to tell me that the doctor said if my dad could get calcium, it could counteract the effects of potassium. It could save his life.
Thank you. Let's shift back to that conversation with the doctor now. Did you respond to them after they asked you?
Yes. Once I realized we were talking about CKD, I told the doctor that I was worried about this diagnosis. And the doctor said, "Don't worry, I know a lot about CKD and I'll be able to help if necessary." I think she could tell it really reassured me, so she even took out her doctor's bag and showed me all these supplements she had. There was potassium and calcium in there. And she told me I'll use calcium if I have to.
Thank you.
Objection to hearsay, Your Honor?
A little late there.
Maybe her?
Sure.
May I just clarify what the statement is? Is it this is a statement of I'll use calcium if I need to?
Sure.
Is that the opposing counsel? Is that the statement?
I mean, the testimony's already come out, so I'm not sure you can really go back at this point.
Yes, I'm referring to I'll use calcium if I have to.
Maybe you heard of that, correct?
Sure.
We're not offering this for the truth of the matter. In fact, it's our contention today that Dr. Edmund had the calcium that could save Avery Bancroft and chose not to administer it to him. We're actually offering it to show the opposite effect.
Could have asked her about that when she was testifying, no?
Yes, Your Honor. But this is testimony that was elicited to specifically Mr. Hobson, and he's explaining his experiences that he had with Hillary Edmund as the person the defense is contending today killed his father. We're not offering it to prove that she was going to use the calcium if she needed to. We're offering it to prove that she was lying.
I tend to agree that it's hearsay. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
And please make more timely hearsay objections in the future.
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, I want to shift focus from the 24th, when the doctor showed you a bag of supplements, including potassium, to the 25th. Could you tell us how that day started for you?
Yeah. I woke up and all I heard was screaming and chaos outside. When I first saw my cabin, I went to see what was going on. There was this big crowd in my dad's cabin. I fought through and I saw my dad on the floor, Dr. Edmund on top of him doing CPR.
How did you react when you saw your dad on the floor with Dr. Edmund standing over him?
Well, of course, I was in shock. I fell to the floor next to the doctor and I was screaming at her, asking her if she had given my dad calcium, why she was doing CPR, if we had just talked about this, if she knew what she could do to help.
Did the doctor respond to you asking why she wasn't giving him calcium?
It's like she didn't even hear me. And At some point, she just stopped. She said, "He's gone, and I've done all that I can."
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Props.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Hobson, growing up, it was just you and your mom, right?
Most of the time, yes. My mom did an excellent job raising me.
And you never reached out to your father?
No.
But then, in 2000, your mother, she was diagnosed with cancer.
Yes, that's right.
And all of a sudden, you needed money for her treatment.
I needed a lot of things. I wish I had had more support in general, but yes, then I reached out to my dad and hoped that he would support me in that time.
Right. As soon as you needed money, you turned to Avery Bancroft.
My mom was dying. I reached out to a father figure that I needed in a difficult time when I felt like I had nothing left. So yes, I reached out to him.
And he didn't respond to you.
No, he didn't.
And when he didn't send that money to your mom, you hated him.
At the time, I was upset.
Well, when she died, you blamed him for her death.
Looking back on it, yes. I mean, it was a tough battle, and I really wish that I'd had another person there, another form of parental support.
So later, 2009, your mom, she unfortunately passed away. Yes.
She did.
And before that, she had covered all of your expenses.
Yes, she would sometimes work 3 jobs at a time. She was incredibly hardworking and took care of me the best that she could.
So once again, all of a sudden, you needed money.
My mother was dead.
Did you need money?
Yes, I needed a lot of things that time. I mean, sometimes it felt like I couldn't even get out of bed.
But you were
because
drowning in debt.
The one
Objection,
person.
Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to finish his answer.
Your Honor, I simply asked the witness if he needed money, and he's talking about his emotional health at the moment. I'm trying to elicit the response of whether or not the witness needed money.
May I be heard?
I would ask that you only answer the question that is asked of you, and yes, please don't interrupt the witness
Yes,
when
Your
the witness is talking.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Hobson, you were drowning in debt.
I had that, yes.
And once again, you turned to Avery Bancroft.
Yes, I turned to him for support.
Your father, he started sending you $50,000 a month.
That's right. I was able to use that to pay off my loans from education and from my mom's debt. And then I was able to start to use it for projects that I cared about to better the Midlands environment.
Yeah, as you said on direct earlier, you used this money for the causes you cared about, right?
Absolutely. I'm actually starting this new TV network to increase education about composting. It's called ROM Composting. I think it's going to be a hit.
So, were the causes you cared about not one, but 2 Ferraris, a Mercedes, and a Porsche, Mr. Hobson?
Well, yes, investing in electrical and sustainable transportation was part of my projects.
Were the causes you cared about hiring a private chef for yourself?
Absolutely. I believe in pursuing a vegan and low-waste diet.
And the causes you cared about were spending $10,000 each and every month on wine alone?
Yes, I believe in supporting the Midlands vineyards.
But Mr. Hobson, not all of this money went to your debt then, right?
What's behind?
Went to your debt then?
No, like I said, I had many projects to invest in. I had many important causes and nonprofits that I believed in.
And you didn't save the money your father was giving you.
No, I mean, as mentioned, I did invest in assets, but I was mostly concerned with doing the most I could with the projects that I had.
So, all of a sudden, in April of 2023, your father, he stopped sending you money.
Yes, that's true.
And besides Avery Bancroft, you had no source of income.
I had no source of income. I had assets and I had projects that I was working on.
But this didn't stop you from spending money on your luxurious habits, did it?
Well, no, it didn't stop me from spending money. There are projects and nonprofits that depend on my support. I couldn't just stop that.
You still spent the money on your private chef?
Yes.
And instead of getting a job, you took out loans and mortgages, isn't that right?
I had jobs.
Instead of getting an income from your jobs, you took out loans.
I am passionate about nonprofits, and I took out loans to up my credit.
So you use these loans and mortgages to pay off your luxurious habits.
I used them to up my credit.
You didn't know when or if Avery Bancroft was gonna send you money again.
No, and it wasn't a concern. What I was worried about was that it just felt like he didn't support me in an emotional way. I wasn't worried about the money. Like I mentioned, I have plenty of assets.
But you didn't know if he was going to send you money again.
No, didn't matter.
But what you did know was that you were set to inherit 95% of Avery Bancroft's estate.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to read aloud stipulation 22 for the record, which states that at the time of Avery Bancroft's death, his estate was worth approximately $404 million. So you would only receive 95% of $404 million if your father was dead.
That's how wills work, yes.
I'd like to talk to you about how you got on the train. You talked to Kirby Doolittle, who told you that Avery Bancroft would be on the Mid-Riverina Express from April 22nd to April 25th.
Yeah, that's right.
And after hearing that, that's when you booked your ticket.
Yeah, that's when I looked for a time slot. I was going to avoid my father originally, but when I saw the only time slots available were one he was booked for, I figured this was a sign.
So after your father stopped sending you money, you booked a ticket when you knew he would be on that train.
Yes, those things all happened.
I'd like to talk to you about one of the days on that train now. You went shopping in Handworth, isn't that right?
Yes, a lot of us did. Dr. Edmond did too.
And you bought sunglasses.
Yes, I believe I bought sunglasses.
You bought sunblock.
Sunscreen, yes.
And you made these purchases between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m.
Yeah, that's when most of us were in the shops.
And you made these purchases in cash, is that right?
Yeah, that's what I had at the time.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to present the witness with what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 31. Let the record reflect this has already been entered into evidence. Now this receipt right here, it's from Handworth, isn't it?
Yeah, but this is not my receipt. Why would I buy banana extract? I wasn't baking.
Okay, well, it has purchases for sunblock.
Yeah, that's right, but the sunblock I got was 115 SPF. And as you can see on this receipt, it says SPF 85. I've always been incredibly careful about that, especially since my mom's history. I would not buy a reckless SPF level like that.
It has a pair of sunglasses purchased.
Yeah, a lot of us had sunglasses. It was a sunny trip.
It was purchased in cash,
Yes.
and it was purchased between the hours of 6:30 and 7:30 p.m.
Yeah, that's when we were shopping.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. Now, Mr. Hobson, you would do anything to make the world a better place.
I believe I am making the world a better place with the nonprofits that I believe in and the causes I'm involved in.
And now that Avery Bancroft is dead, you believe the world is a better place, isn't that right?
Well, there's not exactly the correct context to that. Yes, the world is a better place, the environment is a better place with the carbon emissions of Bancroft Estates lower, but am I better off without a dad? No.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hobson, it's a yes or no question. Now that Avery Bancroft is dead, the world is a better place.
As I've said, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor, no further questions.
Redirect?
I have no redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that at this time Mr. Hobson be allowed to step down.
Yes. Do you have another witness?
Yes, I would like to get Alex Silva to the stand. Hold on. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Of course, my name is Alex Silva. It's a pleasure to meet you.
And what do you do for a living?
Formerly, I was a firefighter, head of Engine 52. Currently, I'm the commissioner of the Parks and Rec Department. And I just say I'm pretty good at my job. I've increased the number of parks in Midlands by 100%. You may be thinking, is there only one park in Midlands? And you're right, and you're welcome.
Do you know why you're here today?
I'm here to testify about what took place on the MRE, the Mid-Riverina Express, luxury train trip that went across Australia. I was on it for work.
And why were you on the train again?
Like I just said, I was on it for work, actually starting another new innovative program for Midlands. Basically, we are sending our firefighters to Australia to learn how they fight their fires. The theory is that they can fight bigger, better, and badder fires in the savannah. The wildfires in Midland should be nothing.
Let's move on to the train. When you entered the train, who did you see?
Well, kind of weird. It seems like half of the entire city of Midland somehow got a ticket to this really expensive train in the middle of Australia. Felt like walking down Main Street or entering Chuggy for a pint.
Did you notice anyone in specific when you entered the train?
Get this. Avery Bancroft. That Avery Bancroft, millionaire Avery Bancroft, head of the Bancroft Estates, Avery Bancroft, was on that train.
Did you notice anyone else?
But also another present surprise, one of my old friends, Dr. Hillary Edmond, was on that train. I met her through a mountaineering trip. I kind of organized it to get the firefighters of Midland some upper body strength, and she was the medical consultant.
So when you saw your old friend, did you interact at all?
Not too much on that first night on April 21st, but a few days later, April 24th, we stopped at the New Lark Plains. A few of the passengers were feeling kind of antsy, so we went on a hike throughout the plains, and Dr. Edmond joined me.
And while you were on the hike, what did you guys talk about?
At first, it's what you would expect to talk about. She asked me about my work, catching up, and then she asked me about the Midland Supreme Court, which I found a little bit strange at the time.
Did you find out why you would ask about the Midland Supreme Court?
I mean, I thought it was strange, so I asked that same question. Why would you care about the Supreme Court? I certainly don't work with them often. And she told me that her spouse actually ran for one of the Midland Supreme Court seats. That's Avery Bancroft, that same Avery Bancroft that were on the train.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay. This is out-of-court statements from Dr. Hillary Edmond being used to prove the truth of the matter asserted.
If you would let him finish the question, it would.
I'm not sure I heard hearsay, so for right now I'm gonna overrule the objection, but please renew it again.
Understood.
Let's see, where was I? I believe I was talking about the Midland Supreme Court. I asked why Dr. Edmond would care about the Midland Supreme Court, and she told me.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Before the hearsay, we want to know, for the hearsay exception, I would like to first hear what he says. That's allowed. Unfinished
We have a
question.
little bit of rope just to get it out, but then we're gonna address the objection.
Thank you very much.
She told me that her spouse ran for a Midland Supreme Court seat and that Avery Bancroft bankrolled her opposition.
Okay, so what purpose is this being offered for non-hearsay purpose?
So, according to 8033, hearsay exception.
You may proceed.
Um,
No, with what your explanation is.
Unless, if there is a motive, intent, or plan, hearsay would be allowed. And, well, it wouldn't be hearsay and would be admissible. And right now, he just said that, Dr. Edmond, would, if I proffer, he's gonna use that, we're gonna use that statement to show that Dr. Edmond hated Taylor, Taylor. And so it would show the intent for murdering him. murdering Avery Bancroft.
Your Honor, in regards to this statement, there's no plan or motive or intent being outlined here. Dr. Hillary Edmonds talking about how Avery Bancroft bankrolled these campaigns against her husband. I'm not sure how this falls under 803.
I'm gonna sustain the objection, move on.
So, when you guys talked, did he say anything in specific about Taylor Hobson? That,
Oh, well, nothing about Taylor Hobson. Taylor Hobson actually come up at all in our conversation. We did talk about Avery Bancroft a bit because we both knew Avery Bancroft. And eventually we started talking, and she stopped and she mentioned that Avery Bancroft would soon get what's coming to him.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
now 8033, the exception to hearsay, saying that they would soon get what's coming to them shows that they would have a motive to commit crime against Avery Bancroft.
I tend to agree with them that this goes to then existing state of mind.
Your Honor, if I may at least make my case, whether or not Hillary Edmond believes that Avery Bancroft has what's coming for him doesn't outline that Hillary Edmond herself has a plan or intent or motive to pursue any action in regards to facilitating what she believes to be an action coming towards the way of Avery Bancroft.
You could address that on redirect and certainly in your closing arguments, but I do think that the defense has established a hearsay exception on this point.
Understood, Your Honor.
Understood.
And I would like to move on to the train on the morning of April 25th. What happened?
Of course, originally I planned to wake up early that morning anyways, to get some paperwork done, maybe if I was feeling really energetic, getting some push-ups or getting some exercises in. But actually I was awoken even earlier than I intended because there was screaming coming from down the hallway.
And when you heard the screaming, what did you do?
I said briefly before that I was a firefighter, but I was misleading you all a little bit. I was actually the best firefighter. But when I heard someone in trouble, I got to my feet and I went to see what was wrong.
And where did the screaming lead you?
Well, I went down the corridor out of my room, and I saw commotion right in front of cabin 1, Avery Bancroft cabin. So I made my way through the crowd and inside the cabin.
And when you entered the cabin, what did you see?
I saw Avery Bancroft collapsed in the middle of the room. Above him was Dr. Hillary Edmond. She seemed to be doing first aid or CPR on him.
And do you know how long she was doing the CPR?
Well, I entered the room, and for the long I was in the room, she was doing CPR, and that lasted for about 30 minutes.
What did you help at all?
Like I said, I was a firefighter. That includes EMT training, so I did assist Dr. Edmond as much as I could.
And when you assisted Dr. Edmond, did Dr. Edmond ever ask you ever ask you to look for calcium?
No, as I was assisting Dr. Edmond, he didn't ask me about any medication. He actually barely talked to me. He was just doing CPR for 30 minutes.
Did you see him look around the room for calcium?
No, like I said, he was just doing CPR. She didn't even look up, just pounding on his chest.
And during those 30 minutes of CPR, did she then administer any calcium?
Like I said, she didn't mention any medication. She didn't do anything else other than CPR for 30 minutes straight. No medication or calcium was ever administered.
And after 30 minutes of not looking for calcium, asking anyone for calcium, or administering any calcium, what happened?
After 30 minutes, Dr. Hillary Edmond declared Avery Bancroft dead.
Thank you for your time.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Silva, I want to start with your time on the 23rd. On that day, you observed Kelly Deuce and Taylor Hobson having a conversation, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And during that conversation, Kelly said how wonderful it would be to have family money. Is that right?
I said something to that effect. I wasn't really sure what they're talking about. I entered halfway through the conversation.
And after Kelly you said that, Taylor Hobson hit her with his elbow and gave her a glance disapprovingly. Is that right?
I don't know what disapprovingly means, but yes, it was a bit of an elbow.
All right. Now, later that day, you went on an excursion to a museum. Is that right?
Oh, yes, the Southern Australian Museum. Quite a learned experience.
And Avery Bancroft joined you on that excursion. Is that right?
Avery Bancroft with a few other passengers on the train. It was one of the stops along the luxury cruise trip.
But I want to focus specifically on Avery Bancroft. When he was in the museum with you, he was talking about his plans to change who inherits his business after him. Is that right?
Yeah, well, he wasn't talking to me directly, but he had a conversation of the sorts.
Interesting. Now, I want to move on from that point and move on to the 25th. Now, you mentioned that you entered the room that Avery Bancroft was collapsed in. Is that right?
Like I said, I assisted in the attempted revival of Avery Bancroft that day.
And you saw Hillary Edmond administering CPR. Is that right?
CPR, typical first aid stuff.
Now, you're an EMT and you're trained in CPR. Is that correct?
I'm a trained EMT, at least until 2025. Like I said, my firefighter days are behind me.
And in your opinion, Hillary Edmond and you did everything you could to save Avery Bancroft. Is that right?
Like I said, I don't think Hillary Edmond was doing CPR wrong.
Now, you mentioned that you and Hillary Edmond did everything by the book to address Avery Bancroft's cardiac arrest. Is that right?
Objection? Hearsay? Good statement. We did everything by the book.
Repeat your question.
My question was, do you believe you did everything by the book to administer care to Avery Bancroft?
Asking for this witness's knowledge and experience, and I'll allow it.
Yes, we both did everything by the book. Even I asked for a medical history when Dr. Edmond didn't.
And with your training in, or as an EMT, you didn't raise any objection to how Hillary Edmond was administering first aid?
He was doing, pardon me, she was doing CPR perfectly fine.
And you believe that there was nothing off about what Hillary Edmond and you were doing in regards to the first aid, is that right?
It was perfectly standard CPR, chest compressions.
Understood. Now, the last few questions I want to ask you have to do with what else you saw on that day. You saw Taylor Hobson as you went out of that cabin, is that correct?
And that's true.
And Taylor Hobson was holding a pair of sunglasses, is that right?
Yes, that is true.
And those sunglasses were missing a lens, is that true?
Yeah, as far as I could tell.
All right, no further questions, Ron.
Redirect. Please step down.
Thank you very much.
Just call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, we'll call Dr. Dana Haskins. Will you proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Good afternoon. My name is Dana L. Haskins. The L does not stand for laryngitis, despite what you may think. It's Lindsay. I'm a licensed psychologist with a PhD in clinical psychology.
Would you please briefly describe your educational background to the court?
Certainly. So I received my bachelor's degree in nursing from Boston College, and then I went on to receive my PhD from Midland State University.
You mentioned that you're a clinical psychologist. What does that career entail?
Oh, sure. So after becoming a licensed psychologist, I served Polk County for 19 years as a clinical psychologist. I specialized in working with first responders. As of right now, I own my own private practice as a family therapist.
How did you become professionally involved in this case?
Well, I was hired to perform a psychological evaluation to see if Mr. Taylor Hobson fit the profile of what we would call an intentional killer.
Did you use facts and data when coming to your conclusion in this case?
I did. I based all of my evaluations off of the assessments and tests that I performed on Mr. Hobson. These tests and data that I received from them were able to give me insight into Mr. Hobson's psychological profile.
So these facts and data were sufficient for you to come to a conclusion?
That they most certainly would.
Did you use a method while performing your psychological evaluation of Dr. Hobson?
As a matter of fact, I did. I used what's known as the Trinity method, which involves a series of 3 psychological tests to evaluate the patient's psyche. It's a standard in my field.
That is fantastic. So you, as you said, it is standard in your field to use this method.
Correct. The Trinity method is employed widely throughout the psychological field. It's the gold standard, and as they say, all good things come in threes.
Did you reliably apply your method in this case?
I always do.
I would like to ask about your psychological evaluation of Taylor Hobson. What in particular did that test entail?
So, when I applied the Trinity method, I started with the first test, the Midlands Multifaceted, excuse me, the Midlands Multifaceted test, or the PI. So in this test, we do a series of true and false questions where the subject will answer, and then we'll score those evaluations.
Fantastic. So, would you tell me how, explain it more to the court. How does this work when you're performing it?
Certainly. So the NPI, these true and false questions, specifically test for 5 scales, those being antisocial behavior, aggressiveness, self-importance, disconstraint, and shyness. Multiple studies have shown that scoring high on 2 of these scales, apart from shyness, can predict aggressive or violent behavior.
And so, what did Mr. Taylor Hobson score on this test?
Well, Taylor Hobson did not score high on any one particular scale.
Your second test, what was that called?
The second test was the Chainless Incomplete Sentence Blank, also known as the CSIP.
And so, how does that test work?
So in this test, the subject is presented with a series of fill-in-the-blank questions. They use 20 sentence stems where you'll have the first word or few words of a sentence, and the subject will then fill out the rest of the sentence to their knowledge.
So, what did Taylor Hobson's answers to these types of fill-in-the-blank questions, what do those answers indicate to you about his psychology?
So the way that we evaluate this test, the sentences are scored on a scale of 0 to 7. A score indicating a more negative response will receive a higher, 4 or above, and a positive response showing gentleness or humor will score below a 3. In this case, a score is totaled at the end of it, and if that score total surpasses 70, it indicates maladjustment, which is an individual's inability to react to the demands of their environment. In Taylor Hobson's case, he scored below a 70, indicating that he is not maladjusted.
And the third test that you performed, what was that test called?
The third test is the Thematic Apperception Test, or the TAT.
And so, would you walk us through how that test, your third test, works?
Certainly. For the TAT, we show the subject a series of scene cards. They're little cards with an image on them. Then we ask the patient to create a story as dramatic as possible, describing what they see in that card. And analyzing these stories from the patient will allow us insight into their emotional and psychological status.
So, what was that test? What did that indicate to you when you performed it on Taylor Hobson?
Well, in general, Taylor Hobson's responses shed a lot of light on his past experiences in childhood, as well as his present-day feelings of stress, depression, anxiety, and inadequacy.
I'd like to wrap up by talking about your final exit interview with Taylor Hobson. What did that indicate to you?
Sure thing. So after I finished applying the Trinity method, I conducted a general interview with Mr. Hobson. In this interview, I found that Mr. Hobson felt a lot of sorrow that he was not able to reconcile with his father, Avery Bancroft, before Mr. Bancroft's sudden passing. I also detected that he had no lingering signs of anger or aggression towards his father.
Thank you, Dr. Heskins. One final question. Can you come to a conclusion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty about the psychology of Mr. Taylor Hobson?
Absolutely. Based on my tests and my interview, I concluded that Mr. Taylor Hobson does not fit the psychological profile of an intentional killer. Furthermore, he lacked the hallmark traits of any of these types of intentional killers, and he would be unable to mask those traits if it were present.
Thank you, Your Honor, that's all.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Haskins. I'm just going to be asking you a few questions about your psychological evaluation of Taylor House.
No problem. I apologize. I'm quiet.
No worries. So first of all, can you please tell me what Midland's MPI stands for?
Absolutely. So the Midland's MPI is the multifaceted personality index.
But Dr. Haskins, that's not true, is it? It actually stands for Multiphasic Personality Inventory Test, isn't that right?
Oh yes, my mistake. The I always throws me off.
So you as a qualified psychologist can't even tell me the name of the own test you administered?
No, it's called the MPI.
Well, you just told me it was you said the multi-MPI test. You gave me a different name than the one that's correct, isn't that right?
Yes, I'm sorry, my throat is killing me. But I am very well aware of the test. In fact, I conducted it.
Okay. Let's talk about a little bit about what you saw before conducting that test. Now, when Mr. Hobson entered your office, you saw that they were wearing a medallion, isn't that right?
Yes, noticed that.
And when you asked about that medallion, he said that it was back where it belonged. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And before conducting your test, you also asked if he was familiar with any of the tests you'd be conducting that day. Isn't that right?
Yes, that is true.
And you understood that the reliability of these tests was significantly contingent upon the fact that he was not familiar with them whatsoever.
Well, yes, the tests aren't shared with the public, except for exceptions where it's being taught in a disciplinary course or a exemplary video for psychologists.
And when Taylor told you he was unfamiliar with the tests, you simply just trusted him, isn't that right?
Well, yes.
Now, again, you understood that if Taylor at all knew or was familiar with these tests, it would compromise the validity of those results, isn't that right?
They would create a chance for a compromise. All three of the tests have built-in factors to stop someone from adjusting their own scores.
Now, Dr. Haskins, you agree that it's possible to find the Midlands, MPI, and CISP tests on the internet, isn't that right?
Incorrect. You'd have to be enrolled in a course specifically teaching that material. It is not public knowledge.
Dr. Haskins, is it your sworn testimony today that you cannot find the Midlands, MPI, and CISP tests on the internet?
Certainly not the MPI. That is only disclosed in college courses and exemplary videos for psychologists.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that I'm going to approach opposing counsel, Your Honor, and the witness with what has been marked as Exhibit 36. This is going to be used for a prior inconsistent statement.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Haskins, can you please verify the fact that this is, in fact, what you said? Just to verify, this is an article titled Lying to Yourself, The Science of Manipulating Self-Assessments. This is an article that you wrote, isn't that right?
Oh, that's right.
And this is authored by you.
Yes, I wrote that article.
Now, Dr. Haskins, in a line here it says, resourceful patients are able to find the questions and scoring criteria for many self-assessments online, including both the Midlands, MPI, and CISP tests from personal experience.
Yes, personal experiences such as being enrolled in a college course.
Dr. Haskins, that's not what the statement says. It says that resourceful patients are able to find it. Isn't that right?
Yes, using personal experiences, that being a college course.
But you are saying in this statement that resourceful patients are able to find this information online.
Oh, certainly, given this criteria.
Okay, so I'll ask you one more time. People are able to find the Midlands, MPI, and CISP tests on the internet.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your psychological evaluation. So you're in a little bit of an unorthodox situation in which you knew the person you're conducting a psychological evaluation of prior to conducting it. Isn't that right?
Yes, which is why I went to the Midlands Board of Psychology before conducting this, and I got approved.
And while it was approved, this is not considered typical in your field. Isn't that right?
No, but given the circumstances, it was approved by the Midlands Board of Psychology.
Now, additionally, you conducted 3 tests. Isn't that right?
Yes, the general standard is 3 tests.
But in your own testimony, you say that most psychologists you know conduct 5. Isn't that right?
Yes, most that I know, but the gold standard in the field is 3, and I used 3 in this case.
let's talk a little bit about some of the responses that Taylor Hobson elicited in your psychological evaluations, starting with the Midlands MPI. So, is it true that Mr. Hobson responded true to it being better to keep his mouth shut when he was in trouble?
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, additionally, he responded true to believing his father was a good man.
Yes.
But
Rule 403 is essentially more cumulative than, probative. They're just asking questions from his specific test, just reading off the test.
Response?
Your Honor, if I may, I need this to be heard by the court and by the jury. I'm just asking what, based off of their evaluation, just some of the responses that led to that determination being made.
I'm going to overrule the objection because I do think this is highly relevant, and I don't think it's come out in any other way previously, but certainly renew the objection if you think it does start to become cumulative.
Thank you. Yes.
I'll ask the question again, Dr. Haskins. Now, Mr. Hobson responded true to it being better, to him believing that his father was a good man. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's true.
And yet, in your interview that you conducted after these 3 tests, he told you that he resented his father.
Well, you expressed that he regretted not reconciling with his father.
Let me direct you back to the question that I asked. Taylor said that he resented his father. Isn't that right?
Yes, there's no contradiction there. You can believe someone to be a good person and still not like them.
All right, let's move on to the next test you conducted, the CISP test. Now, during the CISP test, the psychologist has a heavy level of discretion over the results of the test. Isn't that right?
That's right. The psychologist is the one to evaluate those responses based on their experiences. In my case, I had 20.
And Mr. Hobson scored 69, isn't that right?
Yes, which is below the mark for maladjustment.
But that's just one single point away from being considered maladjusted, isn't that?
Yes, but nonetheless, it still means he is not maladjusted.
Now, let's talk about that final test you conducted, the TAT test.
Absolutely.
Now, you choose the cards that Mr. Hobson will elicit responses to, isn't that right?
That's right. There are 31 cards available, and we choose between 5 and 12. In my case, I use 6.
Now, Dr. Haskins, I'm going to mention a few of the responses that Taylor made to some of these cards.
Certainly.
Now, for card B, did Taylor Hobson respond to the card by saying that the person had just done something terrible, something that they could never take back?
That was his interpretation of the image on that card, yes.
And your evaluation of this statement indicates a level of aggression, isn't that right?
Yes, but not enough to warrant further psychological follow-up.
But aggression does indicate the traits of a killer, doesn't it?
Yes, but to a certain degree. All people possess a level of aggression, but this profile of an intentional killer has a much higher bar.
Let's move on to another card that you showed Mr. Hobson. Card E. Now, to card E, Mr. Hobson responded that the person was
Objection.
caught.
Again, more cumulative than probative. They are, sorry. Yes. He's just reading off answers from the test and not adding anything to them.
Are you intending to explore a new area that hasn't already been covered?
Yes, Your Honor. This, for one, is my final question, but also this hasn't been brought up to the jury yet, so it's important that this is heard by the jury.
Based on the fact that the representation that this is the last question, I'm going to allow it. So your objection is overruled.
Yes, sir.
Now, Dr. Haskins, I'll repeat again. For card E, did Mr. Hobson respond by saying that the person was caught red-handed and justice had been served?
Yes, that is how we interpreted the image on that card.
Now, Dr. Haskins, you admit that it's difficult to evaluate the validity of the TAT test, isn't that right?
Yes, it's an older examination.
And additionally, Taylor refused to be recorded during the examination, isn't that right?
Yes, we don't force anyone to be recorded.
Right, but most people that you psychologically evaluate are recorded, isn't that right?
I would say so.
All right, I'm going to move on to your time on the the Mid-Riverina Express. Now, is it true that on the 24th you saw Taylor Hobson with an orange hoodie?
Yes, I saw him with an orange hoodie at the time.
And finally, on that day, the 25th, when Mr. Bancroft would be found dead, and Taylor Hobson walked into the room and saw that body, he uttered the words, "I wish I could take it back." Isn't that right?
I believe that's what I heard. I have no idea what it's referring to.
Thank you, Dr. Haskins. No further questions, Your Honor.
Can you redirect?
No, no.
Okay. You may sit down.
Thank you.
Does the defense have any other witnesses?
At this time, the defense rests our case in chief, Your Honor.
Okay,
If the time would allow, we would want a 10-minute break.
I defer to you all, it's your time.
Five minutes maybe?
Yeah.
That would be excellent.